this is the April 20th, 2021 school board meeting of the Montgomery Independent School Board. Please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Honor the Texas flag. I pledge allegiance to thee, Texas, one state, under God, one and indivisible. All right. All right, Dr. Morrison, I believe we have a number of special recognitions tonight. If you don't mind, I'd like to take the first one.
Please.
Our first one is somewhat somber. Mr. Gifton Underwood passed away recently. Mr. Underwood was a longtime superintendent of Montgomery School District for 20 years. I've asked Mr. Kirby to make a few comments as someone that was influenced by Mr. Underwood.
Yeah, so we moved here in 1987, and Mr. Underwood was the superintendent, and it was a much different district then than it is now, much smaller. I see Ms. Freeman out there. We were in the same class. Mr. Underwood was very visible, very warm, very caring, very involved. It's a sad day. I know he hasn't been part of MISD for a while, but even though he hasn't been employed by, he stayed a part of the community, and he was always a very good man. I had a story from another classmate of ours, her little sister, who was Shelley Fox at the time. She was a few years younger than us. She shared with me today. I want to read this just because she wrote it, and I thought it would be fair for this to be shared. Mr. Underwood had his pilot's license, and he offered to take some of our classmates on a plane ride. While this would be unheard of in these days, my mom and two other mothers brought us to the Montgomery County Airport, and Mr. Underwood took me and the two other classmates on an aerial tour of Montgomery County. He pointed out our school, which is now the admin building, and where we all live, this building, which is old MES. It was my first time in an airplane, so naturally I was nervous, but I remember feeling very safe with Mr. Underwood. I imagine that the parents of Montgomery felt equally secure with Mr. Underwood at the helm of Montgomery ISD. His legacy and his compassion for those he served is in integrity. This is from Dr. Shelley Fox Winkler. She's class of 93. She is currently the assistant superintendent at Conroe ISD. So I just wanted to share that with y'all because great man who left his mark on this district, and he will be missed in the community.
Thank you, Mr. Kirby. So on behalf of the school board and the MISD family, we would like to offer our sincerest condolences and prayers to the Underwood family, the colleagues, and the thousands of students that Mr. Underwood impacted across his multi-decade career in education. And with that, I express my deepest condolences. Dr. Morrison.
Thank you, President Fuller. So we are, having just talked about one servant leader, we get the chance tonight to recognize a number of amazing servant leaders in Montgomery ISD. And I think you see a number of our principals here today. And, you know, the principals, the buck stops with them. But a lot of times our principals know this, that it's kind of like being the quarterback. When you win the game, you get all the praise. And sometimes when the game isn't won, you get too much of the blame. But no matter what happens in the game, you wouldn't be able to do the things you need to do without people keeping you protected and taking care of the interests of the team. And assistant principals are really those individuals that do the work that needs to happen. They do so much to take care of our teachers or our students. They are conduits to communicate with our parents and our community. And they sometimes do their jobs with long hours and not as much recognition as there should be. It's a tough job. It's an important job. It's a valued job. We're very fortunate to have some really strong assistant principals in our district. And I'm really excited tonight to be able to recognize these amazing leaders because while this has been a tough year on every employee of Montgomery ISD, I was thinking about this the other day. It's probably been the toughest on the individuals we're to recognize tonight. I promise you, in superintendent school, principal school, assistant principal school, they did not teach you about contact tracing. They didn't teach you about quarantining. They didn't tell you how to do the letters, to call the parents to tell them, well, yes, their student was 6 foot, but if it would have been 5 foot, we would have had to do this, but because it was 6 foot, we had to do this. And they have had to take the challenge and the mantle of that all year. And they've done a phenomenal job. When we are excited about telling this community that we've had 94% of our students back for in-person learning, while many districts across the country are still trying to figure out how to open, a big reason we've been able to get our kids back, to keep our students safe, to keep our faculties and our staff safe, is because of the amazing assistant principals we have in Montgomery ISD. So I'd like to ask Justin Moreno to come forward, and we have some things that we'd like to do to recognize these amazing leaders in our district.
Good evening, trustees, Dr. Morrison. We have a short video we'd like to play before we recognize these heroes here today.
First and foremost, I couldn't do my job without them. They are the backbone of our school.
And as a principal, sometimes you may get pulled away, and your APs, they're that right-hand person.
I just want to say we have the most friendliest APs here. They are always in the hallways, greeting each student as they pass.
Our APs here always are doing something, whether it's going to classroom, helping people, and just helping teachers out.
They are really nice, and they always want to help you, and they're always ask you how your day is, and if something's wrong, they're always there to fix it.
If you step foot into school, the APs, you will find an AP at the door, greeting you with a smile. When you're leaving, you'll find the next AP. Having lunch, you'll find the next AP, and they're always smiling, and it's super cool to have that kind of positive energy around the students.
They do an amazing job. They are everywhere at every level. It's not a single area of focus. They wear a ton of hats, and they wear them so well.
I can't do my job without the APs, and our school's not as good as we are without our APs.
So can we do this, Dr. Morrison, President Fuller? Can I call them up one by one? We have a certificate to give to each of them, and can we do a photo? So from Keenan Elementary, we have Melissa Freeman. From Lincoln Elementary, we have Catherine Norsworthy. Lone Star Elementary, Kelly Lout. Maidley Ranch, Jennifer Williamson. Montgomery Elementary, Kimberly Campbell. Stewart Creek, Steve Johnston. From MJH, Scott C. Also from MJH, Melissa Gilsdorf. Oak Hills, Gifford Whitehead. Also Oak Hills, Jennifer Newton. And from Lake Creek, Dr. Tomini. I think Dr. Tomini could write his dissertation on contact tracing.
Yes.
Christy Fleming from Lake Creek.
That's twice.
Kathy Miller from Lake Creek. And Chris Stowe from Lake Creek. Finally, from Montgomery High School, Matt Bess. Jennifer Griffin. Sherry Hardy. And Kevin Winfield.
Last but not least. Should we just be behind them?
Stand up.
I don't want to make the video.
Okay, y'all ready? 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. Last one. 1, 2, 3. Got it.
Good job, Matt. She's gonna be mad.
That's right, I'm all messed up.
There we go. Oh.
This thing right here.
He's stuck in downtown Houston, so he can't get here.
Right, so that's it. All right, and again, thank you to the APs. We do have a number of public comments tonight. And so, just as a reminder for the folks in attendance, the board may not respond to public comments. We are limiting the public comments to 5 minutes. Please don't be offended that we're rushing you along or that we're not responding. It's just the nature of the Texas Open Meetings Act that we're complying with. So with that, I will call our first public comment to the board from Jenny Drude.
Good evening. Thank you all for the opportunity to speak here tonight. First, I want to thank you all so much. First, I want to say how much I love our school district, and as a lifelong Montgomery resident and an MISD graduate, I am very proud that my children also have the privilege of attending MISD schools. This school year has obviously been a struggle for pretty much all of us. My daughter has had the hardest year of her entire educational career. She hit her breaking point a few weeks ago while in class and had what would be classified as a crisis situation. She wrote something very disturbing, personal, and horrific on a note in class, to which a teacher picked up from her a hand and read. The teacher then emailed me that my daughter was passing notes in class and was just not wanting to do her work, and that she would need to do it during recess. No mention of what the note said or any show of concern at all. Thank God I am the overly concerned helicopter parent that I am, and I was able to get to the bottom of my daughter's true feelings, that in that moment of crisis, quickly, I was able to get to her true feelings quickly before any action was taken. What if I had been busy that day? What if I had been at work? What if I had not been able to talk to her right after school and make her an appointment with a professional? What if she had followed through? She once lit up the classroom, but now she has very little academic self-esteem. I have spoken with the administrators on several occasions throughout the year, and they have been wonderful in helping with the situation, but their abilities can only go so far. I need to make sure this does not happen to any other student at MISD again. Our teachers and elementary education need mandatory training on dealing with crisis situations in the classroom. They need to know what signs to look for, what to do when they see them. We are living in a time of pandemics, cyberbullying, sexual harassment, and discrimination, and these are just a few of the things that have directly affected my children this school year. I know that other students have suffered the same issues and more. Crisis situations will only increase in the classroom, and educators cannot just ignore these students until they are no longer their problem. Please give these teachers the tools that they need to keep their classrooms safe, a safe space for all students. Childmind.org offers an abundance of information for parents as well as educators on dealing with crisis situations as well as suicidal elementary age children. I would also like to add something else to this. If you look at the very bottom of the MISD website, it reads this: Montgomery Independent School District does not and shall not discriminate on the basis of race, religion, color, gender, gender expression, age, national origin, disability, marital status, sexual orientation, or military status in any of its activities or operations. Now, I do not believe that this was this teacher's intention, But the same teacher did make my daughter feel discriminated against for having a diagnosis. When my daughter told this teacher how she felt, she was met with hostility. So while these teachers need to be trained with dealing with mental health issues in the classroom, I have also learned that some also need to be trained with having a child with a 504 diagnosis in their classroom as well. Note that I said some. My daughter has had several teachers over the years. They have made her feel like the smartest kid in the classroom and have encouraged her to keep going and keep trying. They have researched on their own time ways to help my daughter succeed in the classroom. Last year, her teacher was so wonderful that my daughter cried and cried when she realized she could not hug her goodbye due to the abrupt end of the school year. The reason these two go hand in hand is because students with learning disabilities have a much higher rate of depression and suicide than students without. My daughter might have brought all of this to my attention, but this is not all about her. This is about helping the next students that this happened to. Making sure protocols are in place, making sure that when a 504 student is placed in a teacher's classroom, that teacher is properly trained on their specific diagnosis and what it can look like. Not every diagnosis looks the same, not every student is the same, but we should all have the same goal. MISD needs to be providing a safe learning environment for all students, no matter what their diagnosis might have. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. All right. Next, we have Danny Wilson. Danny Wilson, going once, going twice. All right. I'm going to assume that Mr. Wilson has stepped out and is not available for public comment. Okay. Thank you. That concludes the public comment section of the agenda. Next, we're moving on to the consent agenda. Does anyone wish to pull any items from the consent agenda for discussion? All right, hearing none, is there a motion to approve the items on the consent agenda?
Motion to approve the items on the consent agenda.
Mr. Hopkins' motion, is there a second?
Second.
Ms. Turner has seconded. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed and abstain. That motion, the consent agenda passes. All right, moving on, we are going into the action items of our meeting. Dr. Morrison, I'll turn that over to you.
Thank you, President Fuller. We've made a lot of decisions this year, and I will say, while I always think about every action that I ask the board to consider, and I try to get excited about what it means for our school district and our employees, I can't think of one that I'm about to present that I'm more excited about than presenting a compensation plan for this board to consider tonight. From the very start of coming into Montgomery ISD, starting with my entry plan, I went out to the community and I said, what is best about our school district? And repeatedly, no matter what group I was speaking with, I heard over and over and over again, the best part about our school district are the students we have the privilege of serving and the incredible employees that we have who are serving them, teachers, administrators, support staff. And so that's a great situation to find as a strength. But you can't just ask as the new superintendent, where do you have strengths? You have to ask continuously, where can we get better? And where we heard continuously we could get better was that there was a concern that we were going to start losing these amazing employees because of compensation. And so that started a trajectory that leads us where we are tonight, and it has been a journey. Justin, there we go. Now, we are presenting to you something different than is what has been traditionally done during the April meeting. Usually during the April meeting, the board is presented teacher contracts, and the board approves teacher contracts and other employee contracts, which you did earlier this evening. And then the board is asked to approve a budget in June. The step that we're doing tonight is to present to the board for your consideration a comprehensive compensation plan, so that when we then inform our employees about the contracts that we'd like to offer them for continued employment at Montgomery ISD next year, we can tell them what we hope they will receive as exceptionally good news, which is the additional compensation they will get to do the important job that we're tasking them to do. So this is an extension of the contract approval that you did tonight, and it is a part of the journey and the process for the board in terms of the budget that we will recommend to you for your consideration in June. And the way I would suggest that we think about it as part of the budget process is it's really locking our team of 8 into a very simple promise that the highest priority of the budget that I will present to you, and I believe the highest priority that you have directed me as the superintendent to present to you come June, is to prioritize taking care of our employees and taking care of our employees through the compensation that they deserve, the compensation that we know we need to improve. We started this earlier in the year, first of all by balancing the budget. That was certainly an important step. And then in October, I came to the board and suggested that we needed to do something. Unlike other districts that gave some nominal raise last year, initially Montgomery ISD did not. And so I asked the board to consider a 2% raise. And I said at the time that that was not enough, but that I wanted our district to consider that as a down payment for what I hoped we would be able to do. And so the board chose in October to approve the 2% raise. And we communicated that to our employees, but again, that was the first step. The next step is what we present to you tonight. Everything we do in Montgomery ISD has to be built around data. I heard about the discrepancy in pay. I heard that we were not competitive with our regional school districts, but we needed the data to show exactly how severe the challenge was. Were we good in some areas, challenged in others? And the reality and the honest answer is that we were challenged in all areas, and we have to do better. It has to be a priority. I know my senior staff probably gets tired of me saying this, but really the development of a school district budget is much like developing your household budget. There's what you would have to spend on, there's what you would like to spend on, and what you would love to spend on. And when you start doing more vacations to Hawaii than paying the rent or paying the mortgage, you're probably upside down on the priorities of your household budget. And when we're not prioritizing our incredible employees, when we're not making their compensation and competitive wages for teachers, support staff, administrators, clerical, auxiliary, when that's not the driving force of our budget process, we're getting our priorities wrong, and we're doing too many of the things that we might like to do or would love to do, and not enough of what we have to do, which is to prioritize these individuals. So we started with data, and the data suggested we had some work to do. We asked the Texas Association of School Boards to come in and do a staffing review because, obviously you hope that there will be additional revenue to cover any intended compensation, but there was also the need to find some offsets, so that work happened. I know a number of our principals are still in the audience tonight, and I cannot thank them enough for the work that they have contributed. When I went to them in October and said, I'm thinking about going to the board, presenting a proposed raise, they were all for it. And then I said, okay, that's great. They raised their hand and said, yeah, let's do it, but we have to find a way to pay for it. And that might mean some challenging decisions that we're going to have to face as a district and as a campus. And they didn't blink. And a matter of fact, not only did they not blink, they wanted this to be the priority on every step of the budget development, on every step of looking at how we're going to approach compensation comprehensively in this plan that we're presenting tonight, and in finding the offsets to help contribute to that plan. They have been fundamental partners and involved in every step of this process, and I thank them tremendously for their leadership. We have tried to do this work of creating a comprehensive compensation plan as part of our budget development, very transparently and very publicly. We have done budget town halls. We've done budget roadshows where we've gone to each of our schools to talk about what we'd like to put in this plan. What are the needs of our employees? How does this fit in the overall budget? We've done that at our different facilities across Montgomery ISD. We have met with impacted employees to talk about the impacts in terms of compensation for their important roles. And then we've had numerous workshops with this board. And I want to make sure I say this. I cannot thank the 7 individuals that I get to work with as a board for their focus. This is truly, while I will say it is our recommendation tonight, every aspect of the comprehensive compensation plan that is being presented has had the input of this board. Everything from saying, new superintendent, make our priority our employees. Let's figure a way, despite needing to balance the budget, to increase compensation. Let's prioritize teachers. Let's make sure that we look at some of the areas that we know we've fallen even further behind, areas like our counselors and DIAGs and SLPs, to do this work and to be thinking about the impact on our employees. Every step of this you have been involved with, and so I hope as you see the comprehensive compensation plan, you see your input, your hopes, and your desires in what we're presenting tonight. So it really has been a call to action. We looked at the data, and the data said that doing a little something was not going to be enough. We had to take pretty dramatic action, and we knew that in order to present the compensation plan that we wanted to do tonight, we were going to need somewhere in the vicinity of around $4 million of hopefully proposed increases in revenue, as well as offsets to reach this goal. And so we have looked at ways to consider proposed salary increases, which we were asking you to consider tonight. We've considered practical, necessary offsets to adjust to that. But along this pathway, it hasn't just been offsets. There are areas we knew that we needed to add. Additional counselors at our secondary schools, adding instructional support to our schools. So it's not just where we've tried to find offsets, but where there are also needed additions that are part of this plan. And so because it is part of your budget process, because you want and you are fiscally responsible, and one of our high priorities of this community is to be good fiduciary officers of the taxpayers' dollars, while sometimes our hearts say go and your head needs to say whoa, it is fiscally responsible to ask, hey, we want to do something significant for our employees, but can we pay for it? That is an important question. The answer to that is yes. Even though we're presenting the compensation plan ahead of the budget, we feel very confident that we have covered the cost of this plan. We shared with you at a budget workshop in March our initial projections of increased revenue. And Mr. Hammonds, I always look to you, and I think you have guided us, and Chris and I share this philosophy. We tend to budget very conservatively. And so we believe that from our anticipated additions to state and local revenue, we will see at least a $1.1 million increase in revenue to apply to compensation. I am firmly on the camp and belief that when we present the budget to you and draft in May and for your final approval in June, that will be much larger than 1.1. And I see Chris grimacing. It will be larger than 1.1, but we needed to budget conservatively, so we anticipate that there will be at least 1.1 million in additional state and local funding to apply to salary. We know that we will get an additional $600,000 in federal SARS money. This is money that our special education teachers and regular educators and the work that they do, their due diligence compliance around IAPs have been able to add because of their good work. And so, again, this is an additional $1.7 million that we can add to our general anticipation of increased revenue. But remember, I said we need to think about around $4 million. 1.7 doesn't get there. So we have had to look for efficiencies, and we have looked at areas where we are perhaps a little overstaffed in some areas based on our regional competitors, and that's why that TASB study was very important. And so we do have $2.42 million in staffing efficiencies. We do have, and tonight part of your agenda will be to consider ways that we could be much more proactive in energy savings. And our proposed company that we're asking you to consider tonight will tell you that there's $400,000 in year one of potential energy savings. We budget conservatively, so you will see $300,000 in our initial projections. And then we are also looking at every area where we contract services and renegotiating contracts, getting better service at a lower cost. And we think, again, when we present to you the final budget in May for consideration in June, that $50,000 will be higher, but all of that comes to $2.77 million. So all told, that gives us over $4 million that we feel comfortable presenting this compensation plan for your consideration tonight. So again, $4.47 million in projected revenue increases and savings, a little over $4 million in proposed expenditures, giving us I wouldn't say a cushion, but a margin of over $400,000 as we start our work on the budget. And so again, we absolutely believe that we can present to you a responsible and aggressive compensation plan for your vote and your consideration tonight. And with that, I'd like to bring up our fiscally conservative CFO, Chris Lynn.
Good evening. As Dr. Morrison said, this has been a journey of several months getting to this point, and tonight is going to be, hopefully, a great night for the employees of MISD. And so let's talk about some of the things that are in this plan. So in this plan that we're asking you to approve this evening, we are recommending that all MISD teachers will receive a $3,300 raise on top of the $755 raise that they received in October, bringing that to a total increase of over $4,055 in 18 months. I mean, that is truly something special and very deservingly needed for our teachers here in MISD.
Mr. Lynn, approximately in terms of a percentage raise, that would be?
Approximately, all totaled, about 7% in an 18-month period, okay? Now, realizing that it takes all employees of the district to do the things that need to get done, we're also asking you to approve a 3% of the midpoint raise for all other employees, so professional, clerical, and auxiliary. With the 2% that they received back in October, that's a 5% raise over the last 18 months. There's quite a few changes to the compensation plan. The first one being we have an actual compensation plan for you to adopt that has actual processes and procedures tied to it. Hopefully you've noticed that change in what has been presented to you in the past. Sticking with the teacher theme for this evening, you'll notice that the hiring schedule has been updated. And so for 21-22, we are asking you to approve a starting teacher rate of $54,450, which is an increase from the current $51,000. Also, on the teacher scale, the previous scale only went to 22 years of experience. We have expanded that scale to now go all the way to 30, and we want to make sure that the employees of MISD understand that raises don't stop at that level, even though the scale stops at 30. Any board-approved salary increases, the employees who with 31 plus years of experience continue to receive those pay increases annually. As far as the professional, auxiliary, and clerical salary scales, all of the minimum, midpoint, and maximums have been adjusted. Remember, we provided you with the heat maps for all of those positions and our comparison data. These new minimum, midpoints, and maximums help to make us more competitive with our surrounding districts for all positions. One of the most difficult decisions that was made last summer was the elimination of a lot of stipends. Our hardest working employees across the district who were receiving stipends for additional duties had some of that money taken away from them at the last minute last year. So this compensation plan restores those stipends that were eliminated during the summer of 2020 to their previous amount. And to show that we've kind of thought about every single aspect of the district, this compensation plan also provides an increase to our substitutes on their daily and long-term rates. And so this has been a journey. We've tried to make it a very thoughtful journey. We're very excited about what we're able to present and what we're asking you to approve this evening. But the journey doesn't stop here either. This is the first step in correcting some things that needed to be corrected. And hopefully next year, at this time, we're able to correct even more of the inequities that have existed in the past. So with that, I think we'll be happy to answer any questions.
Board members, questions? I have one, if you don't mind. It's already been answered by Dr. Morrison, but I just want to say it again for the record. We can pay for this going forward, right, Mr. Lynn?
Yes, sir.
Okay. We have, I think, roughly 87% of our operating budget is staff and people, correct?
Just a little bit less than that, somewhere in the range between 80 to 85.
80 to 85.
Yes.
How many people, how much we pay them, and additional benefits.
Okay. And so this doesn't because of that cushion that we have, and it's being very close, this doesn't throw that out of whack either, correct? It doesn't mess that up for us.
No, sir. As you saw, some of the ways that we're paying for this is identifying efficiencies in other areas of the budget, as well as staffing, and so we should still fall within that range.
Okay.
If you don't mind.
Mr. Kirby.
Yes. As we've been close to it and seen it, obviously, a lot of appreciation goes out to Dr. Morrison and Mr. Lynn for what you guys have done, but also want to recognize and thank the principals and the campus administrators, because it was mentioned the heartburn that y'all had to go through to make these cuts and through these tough times the last two years. We surely appreciate it to be able to help us get to this point. Thank y'all.
Any other questions, board members?
Mr. Lund, on stipends, there are some stipends that we're excited about that we were able to add,
Sure.
as well as the restoration of the stipends that were cut. You want to speak to those?
Sure. In the compensation plan in front of you tonight, we did create a few new stipends, especially for our special education, both teachers and paraprofessionals who are in a self-contained environment. We will be offering teachers in life skills, ABLE, functional academics, and ECSE. Did I say that right, Meredith? We'll be offering the teachers in those programs a $1,000 annual stipend, and for the paraprofessionals who support them in those environments, a $500 annual stipend. As far as our police department goes, we had a suggestion from one of our school board members and also our chief of police to include some certification stipends for intermediate, advanced, and master's certifications. And so as our officers obtain each one of those certifications, they will receive an additional stipend as well. So that will help to reward them for the certification that they've already received and encourage them to continue their journey forward and obtain that next certification.
And dual language?
Yes, sir. Dual language is becoming very competitive, and so in order to help us close the gap and try and compete with some of our neighboring districts, we're going to be augmenting the dual language bilingual stipend. We're actually, I believe, doubling it from $3,500 to $7,000.
So what I want to make sure I say to the board and also say to our community, I am excited about being able to present this plan. First of all, that it is a compensation plan being presented. It will be made available if you choose to approve it tonight on the website for our employees to be able to look at. We will then accompany their contract with an initial salary proposal based off of the vote that you take tonight if you choose to support it. So that, again, we respect our employees to not only say we want you to continue employment in Montgomery ISD, but here is an anticipated salary for you. I'm excited because this has been a journey, but the journey doesn't end tonight. We have further to go. There's more work to be done. This will continue to be a focus. And I especially want to make a quick comment about that we are doing as much as we can, as fast as we can. And there are going to be some groups who are going to say, why did you do certain things in this plan? There are certain areas and certain positions that when we looked at the difference in pay, we knew we had to take even a more aggressive approach. Counselors, diagnosticians, SLPs. These were areas that we needed to make additional recommendations for your consideration to augment to make sure that the talented individuals that we have stay in Montgomery ISD, and when there are vacancies, we can attract great talent in those areas. We did make some initial changes to stipends with the restoration and some new ones. That is the work that is still to continue as we hire, and you all approved a new executive director of human resources tonight. That will be work that will continue because we've got people doing amazing things for our schools, for our students. We have to make sure that with our stipends, they also are competitive and respectful for the tremendous contributions that our employers are presenting. So are we excited? Yes. Are we proud that we're presenting to you a compensation plan and not just a salary schedule? Yes. Is there more work to be done? Absolutely. And that's the work that will start tomorrow morning.
Well, I'd like to say thank you for that. And thank you to Mr. Lynn. As Mr. Kirby said, thank you to all the principals. Is there a motion? If there are no more questions, is there a motion from the board?
I'll make a motion.
All right, Ms. Porton.
I move to approve the 21-22 compensation plan as presented and to authorize the following pay increases as recommended. $3,300 increase for all employees on the teacher hiring schedule and a 3% of the midpoint raise for all professional, clerical, and auxiliary employees.
I'll second that.
Mr. Kirby seconds. All those in favor? Aye. Opposed and abstain. That motion carries. Thank you.
Thank you.
I think that deserves it.
Thank you, board. Probably we should have banged the gavel and go home tonight. But we just asked you to spend a lot of money on behalf of our employees, and we have to also find a way to start paying for that. And that leads us to the next action item that we'd like for your consideration, how we're going to find some of those efficiencies to pay for the pay increases that you just supported. Mr. Lynn.
Yes, sir. A few months ago, we issued a request for proposal for some energy management partnership, and we are asking you this evening to approve Synergistic to help us with that work. And here this evening from Synergistic, we have Doug Bilyeu. So he's here to help answer any questions that I may not be able to answer on their behalf. Just want to make sure that, we cover a few basics. Obviously, for the most part, we know who we are. We're 9,047 students, have 10 school buildings. But you may not know we have about 1.9 million square feet in the district. And then, as you can see, our district energy costs from 2018-2019, we used that year because that was obviously pre-COVID, and COVID skewed things a little bit. So a little over $2.8 million for electricity. Obviously, that's the big one. When you add natural gas and water, we're close to $4 million in total utility expenditures, $328,000 a month, or roughly just under $11,000 a day. So hopefully there's some savings that we can accomplish in there somewhere. So just to tell you a little bit about Synergistic, they were founded in 1986. They're nationwide, doing business in 48 states. 230 plus employees, so they've been doing this for a long time. Now to the good stuff, and this is where Dr. Morrison said they were going to show a substantial increase above the 300,000, but we hope they're right, and we trust them that they are going to be right, but we're going to budget conservatively. And so year one, they're projecting over 406,000 in savings, and over a 5-year period, which is what the agreement period would be with them, we're talking about over $3.1 million in savings. This program is funded from the expected utility budget. As I mentioned, a 5-year initial term. There is no financial risk, because if they don't save us the money that they say they're going to save us, we don't pay their fee. Okay, so they are motivated to make sure that our fees are covered through savings. And then they will hire a local energy specialist to help our maintenance and operations team to identify and implement the necessary changes. And so how are they going to do that? Optimizing HVAC equipment, deliver more comfortable, healthier buildings, and identify savings opportunities in real time and track those solutions. And so,
Mr. Lynn, real quick, and I just want to interject, because that's something that Mr. Lynn and I, as we did our budget roadshows, we are not coming for teacher microwaves. We are not turning the air conditioning down during the summer and the heat. That's not what this is about. It's making district 30,000-foot decisions that can comprehensively save us energy efficiencies that translate into real dollars.
Yes.
So,
And so this slide talks about how they're going to do that. As I mentioned, they're going to embed an energy specialist in our organization, and then we're also going to receive support from them through a rotating team of engineers and experts. We're going to use energy savings technology to help us track our expenses and identify where we have opportunities for savings. And then one of the things that we liked, our maintenance department took a pretty big hit last summer with some of the budget cuts. And so they're going to help us address some of these comfort issues, freeing up some of our maintenance staff to do the other work that they need to do. And so this is just, once again, kind of the partnership that they lay out between our facilities team, their team, and our energy specialist. And then this is just a sneak peek of some of the cool energy technology that they're going to be using to help us achieve those savings. So, Doug, did I do an okay job? Anything you'd like to say?
Could you go back just one more slide quickly?
Sure.
And one of the things we'll do periodically is update you in terms of how we're doing on the savings, and are we trending towards the anticipated savings? Hopefully, are we actually getting even more savings? But we'll keep you updated on that in real time.
Yeah, I would just like to say thank you for the opportunity to possibly partner with Montgomery ISD. 35 years of experience, and we feel like we can help the district by working together. It is teamwork. We don't want to be seen as a third-party vendor. When we partner with the district, we want to be a part of your team. And when everybody's foot is in the circle, we can do great things together. And again, your loyalty towards your employees that we've seen here tonight, that's what we're about too. We want to save you money that can go back into your teachers and your kids here in the district, and do it in a no-risk way to the district. So again, hopefully that fits right in there with where you're aiming.
Doug, I'm sorry, I didn't catch your last name.
Bilingual.
Doug, Mr. Bilingual, just two questions. Since y'all are a national company, and it said locally y'all are going to hire an energy specialist, do you have someone in mind already?
We work with your district to try to find someone local that knows the culture of your district, that knows, maybe has already some relationships with your building administrators. That makes it a little bit easier. So we'll work with your HR to help identify that person and go work together to identify that person.
Okay, that's a really important piece of this equation
Absolutely.
right here. And then lastly, my last question is, how many times, 9 times out of 10, do y'all hit your mark on the money? I mean,
well, in the theme of being conservative, we try to be very conservative on our projections as well, because we would much rather under-promise and over-deliver, and 9 times out of 10, we're going to do that.
okay, thank you.
Absolutely.
Board members, are there questions?
Are you providing training for our current employees also, like our technicians and stuff like that?
Absolutely. Our experts and our engineers, when they come in, they work closely with your folks.
Okay.
Yeah, our job is to bring recommendations and talk those through with your team.
Okay.
Yep.
Any other questions for Mr. Bilingual or Mr. Lynn?
So you're going to perform like a consultancy at first, right?
Absolutely.
And come in and do a full evaluation of all of our facilities and say, look, this is what we recommend.
From the get-go.
Right? And then you'll have a person in place here that is going to be the link between the district and your firm.
Team. And they're managed by a client manager that'll be assigned to your district as well. So there's a team of professionals around that energy specialist. We train that person, but we also have daily, weekly interaction with them, and we're coming into the district and working on progress. Very heavy on the beginning too, because they've got to get to know your buildings and your culture and know what's going on to be able to start identifying those strategies moving forward.
In the cost savings, the 5-year cost savings, when does that become reality? When does that start? Does the clock start? Obviously, it doesn't start now. It starts.
We're looking to identify ways that we can save right away. Once we go into contract and once we have boots on the ground, which is almost immediately, we're looking for ways to start developing those strategies. Absolutely.
Does it include this facility as well?
It does. It does. Our job, again, as Dr. Morrison mentioned, is not to make teachers uncomfortable. Our job is number one, it's non-negotiable. Teachers and students have to be comfortable in the learning environment. That is job number one. So if there's an issue with that, again, that's the great part about our energy specialists. They can be that advocate for the teacher, free up your HVAC team for fixing the things that they need to fix. We do the detective work. We put the loggers in the room. We look for data. We want to get to the root issue of that comfort complaint and get it fixed and bring that back to your team.
You don't want to take our teachers' air conditioning. We've learned that.
We've tried that.
We've tried that. It doesn't work very well.
I know that. Yes, sir.
Any other questions? All right, hearing none, is there a motion?
I'll move to approve entering into an energy savings agreement with Synergistic LLC and delegate authority to the superintendent to negotiate the terms and execute the agreement.
Is there a second?
Second.
Mr. Hopkins has seconded. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? And abstain. That motion carries. Thank you, Mr. Billu, Mr. Lynn.
Thank you.
All righty. That rounds out the action items for the evening, but we do have some information items, and one that I'm very excited about, our demographic report. Dr. Morrison?
Thank you, President Fuller. We had an opportunity at a special board workshop recently to overview the preliminary data for the demographic study. This is a critically important piece of data. As I said earlier, we try to make all of our decisions based off of data. So when it's compensation, we're going to look at compensation studies, we're going to look at staffing models, and we're going to bring in independent third parties to help us with that. But almost every major decision that we make as a district, the ones that we're making currently, decisions we may need to make in the future, is really built around, are we a growing district? Are we a declining enrollment district, or are we a stagnant district? And for all sorts of reasons, including budget, you want to be a growing district. And so I was very appreciative of the board earlier in the year when we brought to you for your consideration doing a demographic study. Your organization that was approved has done strong work. And again, we just thought that it was important enough now that you've really had a chance to be able to get familiar with the data that was presented, to come back, finish off a high-level overview by our consultants, and then give you an opportunity to ask questions that you may have.
Yes, sir. So here this evening, once again, you'll remember Stacy Tapera from PASA, and so she's going to lead you through the presentation this evening.
Good evening, and thank you very much for having me back. You heard a lot of detail 2 weeks ago. I am going to skip over all of that detail from before, no need to rehash that, and go straight to a high-level overview of our student enrollment projections. So, as you have heard, we developed a low growth, a moderate growth, and a high growth scenario of projections based on the data we collected. The moderate growth scenario is not just the midpoint of the two extremes. It's what we gathered all of this data, and we said, we think that the most likely course of events could yield this many students under this moderate growth scenario. But a lot of things could happen to make it low growth, and a lot of things could happen to make it high growth. And so then we bracket in some form of reality from working off of that moderate growth scenario. So all of the numbers that you'll see later tonight are the moderate growth scenario. I draw your attention to the graph that shows for the first 5 years, the low growth to the high growth is not a very wide range. And that illustrates that we have a greater deal of confidence in the first 5 years of our projections. The last 5 years are very important, but a lot can happen between now and 2030, right? A lot of changes can happen. Think about what life was like 10 years ago and how many things have changed since then. So that's why that range grows at the end, in the latter 5 years of our projection period. But for now, we're going to focus on the moderate growth scenario because this is sort of what we consider the most likely scenario of growth. That first year shows an increase of 311 students, but remember that that's measuring from last October's PM snapshot date. And since then, you've already gained some of that 311 students back, over 100, maybe 125 or so at last count. You guys would know that better than I as far as the most recent counts. But this is to illustrate to you that though that 311 student gain for next year looks large, it's already happening. Those students that were not enrolled on the PM snapshot date due to COVID, health security concerns and so forth are coming back, trickling back largely at the younger grades. So again, I remind you that that top row is the first year of our projections, and we have the most confidence in those. The last 5 years are benchmark data for you to use to think ballpark, what should we be planning on happening, with the understanding that there's that range between the low and high of what could be happening realistically. So what do we do with these numbers, and where is this growth projected within the district, not just whole district-wide numbers? So you saw these maps before. These are heat maps showing where the highest student growth rate is projected to happen. And you will recognize these development names. The more traditional subdivisions that are new and are going in are Pine Lake Cove and Fairwater. You know these, you see them under construction. Those are the two red spots in the center of the district, just south of Highway 105. As well as the red hotspot in the deep south, that represents the short-term growth from Grand Lake Estates, as well as long-term potential growth from Sky Ranch, if and when it ever gets underway. But these hotspots, these orange and red spots, how does that relate to the schools, and which schools are those going to feed into? So here you can see the elementary attendance zones overlaid over those hot spots of growth. And so you can see that virtually all of the schools are projected to see some growth in the next 10 years. Even Madeley Ranch, with the continued slow but steady construction in Walden, as well as virtually all of the elementary schools are seeing growth, but those red hot spots are focused in Stewart Creek and Keenan. And so those are the schools that are going to see the most growth over the next 10-year period. How does that translate into numbers for the elementary schools? So let me remind you of a point that I made last week, and that is these numbers you are going to recognize do not match the enrollment that you know to be true at these schools right now. And that is largely because that's entirely because we measure and count and project students where they live. And there are some transfers that happen within the district for special programs. For example, a net of 77 students transfer into Montgomery Elementary. And so those numbers that you see for Montgomery will seem very low to you, but just keep in mind that if that bilingual program remains at Montgomery, then there will continue to be a net transfer into that school. But that program can change at any time, and so again, we're projecting where people will live. So I draw your attention again to Stewart Creek and Keenan as the highest growth schools in the district. And if you want to look 5 years out, because that's within our confidence window, we've got 1,000 students almost at, over 1,000 at Keenan and almost 1,000 at Stewart Creek in 5 years. Now, because if you have trouble getting your head around these numbers maybe not matching exactly what you know to be the enrollment because of the transfers, let's just talk about the projected growth. So you have a feeling for how many kids or how full each of the schools is right now. In the next 5 years, we're projecting an increase of about 200 students at Montgomery Elementary, for example, about 140 at Lincoln, about 112 at Madeley, but Stewart Creek and Keenan are projected to grow in 5 years 250 and 283 students respectively, compared to how many students are enrolled there now. So that gives you a little bit more to sink your teeth into to get your head around what these schools could look like in 5 years. a question that we have to address every school district has a different perception of how to measure capacity and how full is too full. And so we as outside consultants can't make that decision for you. We have to have some sort of a baseline comparison that we can compare year to year. And so what we use is, what you see here is a maximum capacity at each of the elementary schools in the first column. A practical capacity is usually about 90% of that maximum capacity, because you can't put a third grader in a fourth grade classroom just because there's a seat available, right? And so we, as our baseline of comparison, have said 120% of that practical capacity is the threshold that beyond which most districts would not be able to squeeze any more students, throw any more portable buildings onto a site. Those kids would be eating lunch too early or too late for a satisfactory outcome. And so we use that 120% threshold across the board. However, that doesn't necessarily translate to when you think a school is too crowded. And so my job is to show you how many students we're projecting to live in each of these attendance zones, and then it's your job to decide how crowded is too crowded, right? What's our tolerance? What's our threshold of overcrowding? So these yellow highlights illustrate the years in which each school is projected to exceed that 120% threshold. For Keenan, that means 1,000 students in the Keenan attendance zone, plus or minus some transfers in. Currently, there are a net 25 transfers in. Again, that's followed closely behind by Stewart Creek in 2016, when it is projected to reach that 120% or 1,000 student threshold. Now, if you are concerned about that low growth and high growth range for these numbers, let me just give you a ballpark idea, and that is, you'll see that in 2025, we are projecting 4,826 elementary students total under this moderate growth scenario. Under our low growth scenario, we're projecting 125 elementary students fewer than that number. So best case, worst case scenario, I don't know whether it's best or worse, but on the extreme, if that delta of 125 kids were all in Keenan and Stewart Creek, if all of the development that we projected to happen that didn't happen was all located in Stewart Creek and Keenan, then that would still only be about 75 students fewer in each of those schools in 5 years. So is 925 students in Keenan too many? That's your call. But that kind of gives you a ballpark of where our low growth scenario falls. Also, it's important for me to emphasize that we put a great deal of effort into projecting where this growth might happen, and you heard all about it 2 weeks ago. Those plans of those developers, the market, the economy, everything can change, but what we know isn't going to change is ultimately the areas that have potential for growth, that have good access, that have water, that have all of the key attributes for residential development, will eventually develop. Even if it gets delayed a couple of years or accelerated a couple of years, it's going to happen in approximately the locations that we're projecting. And so even if you need to move your timeline, shift your timeline a little bit forward or backward, we know that the locations of new schools in general are going to be consistent regardless of the variations that happen over the next few years. So with that, we'll move on to the junior.
Dr. Shapiro, I'm sorry. I had a question about elementary kiddos.
Sure.
So it looks like in 25, 26, and 27, we're going to have 3 schools at the 120%, at or above 120%. You do a lot of these studies with school districts across the state. How are other school districts dealing with a situation like that? Is 120% right, and how are they dealing with it?
I would say that that most school districts would see 120% in 2025 in two schools that are in close proximity as the need for a new elementary school located in such a place that you can pull students from Stewart Creek and Keenan both, or Domino Zone or something, but you need to use a new elementary school in about 2025, sooner if your threshold for crowding is lower or later, but somewhere in the middle of this projection period in an area that can pull students from Keenan and Stewart Creek both. Now, Lincoln is a tiny campus, and it's inefficient to operate because it's so small. So I would assume that most districts would consider adding on to that campus in order to accommodate this projected growth, and also to make it run more efficiently. There are a lot of other factors that go into that are not my expertise. The age of the building and the size of there's so many other factors, but that could be one way that you could consider handling the overcrowding at Lincoln. I should also say that there are a lot of rumors about potential residential growth out there that are we don't know if they're going to happen, but there is some potential for the latter years of this projection period to really take off even faster than we have projected. We have very intentionally been very conservative because that's our obligation to you, is to not advise you to overspend. In the event that some of these rumors come to be and yield many more students than are projected, or even a few more students, it's very likely that elementary number 8 will be needed within this projection period, but later in the later years. So elementary 7 in the middle somewhere, depending on your local threshold for overcrowding, and elementary 8 later on, obviously, hopefully a later bond election.
So the way I'm seeing the numbers, 25, 26 is where we need a school. That's what it looks like.
Yes, according to our definition of overcrowding.
And then 28 is when we need to really be in the midst of starting another school, a second school, potentially.
A lot of that timing for the second school, or elementary number 8, would be dependent on the location of elementary number 7, how you draw the attendance zones, because if you pull some students from Montgomery, then you won't have quite the overcrowding in Montgomery in the later years, And so there are an infinite number of permutations, and so I can't tell you exactly when elementary 8 will be needed, but yes, it is my conservative opinion that elementary 7 is needed in the middle of this projection period, and possibly elementary 8 later.
How long does it take to build a school?
You have to plan about 3 years out.
I interrupted you, I apologize.
Absolutely, no problem. Any other questions about elementary before we move on? Okay. At the junior high level, of course, the growth, the hot spots of growth that you saw are largely in the south, are largely in the Oak Hills attendance zone, and so that's why you see greater projected acceleration in the population in the south, although that's not to negate the growth at Montgomery Junior High either. And so when we look at the table and compare it to capacities, you'll see that at the end of this projection period, we project, again, that 120% threshold to occur at Oak Hills in about 2028 and at Montgomery in about 2030. Again, remember that graph with the wide variation between low and high. A lot can happen in those later years of this projection period, but this is a good example of why we use this later data as benchmark to help you understand what could be coming, but we're not going to narrow down and say you definitely are going to need junior high number 3 in a certain year. Just understand that junior high number 3 is going to be needed, and it needs to be located in a location that can pull from both of the current junior highs. Any questions before we move on to high school? Okay, at the high school level, again, we see a similar path of growth with Lake Creek High School exceeding Montgomery in these later years, even though it, of course, started out smaller. And Lake Creek is projected to exceed 2,000 high school students in this next 10-year period. So what does that look like compared to Lake Creek's petite capacity? Because, of course, many districts open high schools with a smaller capacity, but build with the smaller capacity, but have a planned expansion later on when it's necessary. And so Lake Creek is projected to need some additional capacity to be built out to its full capacity, again, within the middle of this projection period. And again, that's up to your local level of tolerance of overcrowding. How many students is too many in Lake Creek? Is 1,500 too many, or 1,600, or 1,700? Currently, the max capacity is 1,600 at Lake Creek. So sometime in the middle of this projection period, an addition is going to be needed at Lake Creek to build it out to its planned full capacity. So in summary, I've told you about elementary number 7 being needed in about the middle of the projection period, an expansion of Lincoln potentially, and possibly an elementary number 8 later in this projection period, but again, that depends on a lot of different factors. The junior high situation is going to need to be addressed in these later years, 28, 29, 30-ish, and an expansion of Lake Creek High School to its core capacity in about 25, 26, depending on your level of tolerance. So with that, I can answer any additional questions.
Board members, any questions? I think I share everyone's look on their face and say that you've given us a lot to think about.
Quickly. Yeah, think about very quickly, yes.
And I want to say a sincere thank you for coming back. I know this is the second go-round with us. Thank you.
Happy to
If there are
help.
no other questions, I think we'll move on to the next topic then, if that works.
Very
Thank
good.
you, Stacy.
Thank you.
All right, Dr. Morrison, we have an update on possible federal Esser funds.
Thank you, President Fuller. We did want to update the board on some potential federal stimulus dollars that you may be hearing about. And we want to separate what we know to be true versus what we are hearing, and then also take direction from the board in terms of what potentially might be next steps. So for the first couple of slides, I'd like to ask Justin Moreno to update you on what we know to be factual at this point.
Thank you, Dr. Morrison, and this topic is very much relevant to the other fantastic items that have been discussed tonight regarding district revenues and making sure our district moving forward is financially sound. We wanted to provide you a quick update on discussions happening at the state and federal level. As you know, the state legislature is in session, and I say there's 181 members in Austin who really can have strong implications on the financial future of our school districts and others. There are the push for public education this year is really, they're calling it the 3 legs of the stool. It's maintaining House Bill 3 funding from 2019. It is the hold harmless to school districts for their ADA attendance for students lost during the pandemic. And now the third leg is a push to ensure that federal funds that have been adopted over the past 12 months and recently are supplemented to district budgets, not supplanted. So the Congress has pushed down a significant amount of federal dollars to the states over the last several months, most recently with the American Rescue Plan Act, which provided $12.4 billion to the state of Texas. In total, right now, there is $17.9 billion in federal funding that is pending. State policymakers are determining how to allocate those funds. The first Esser 1 was $1.3 billion. That was supplanted in public education as part of the Hold Harmless. A district like Montgomery ISD, who actually gained students this year, we did not benefit from that action. So there seems to be momentum or discussion towards supplementing what would be the third tranche of Esser funds in the $12.4 billion. And current guidance suggests that the state must distribute 90% of those funds to school districts based on their Title I funding, and school districts would have wide discretion of how those funds would be allocated locally, and some of the suggested areas would be accelerated learning programs, wraparound services. Those are meeting the needs, the non-academic needs of students, infrastructure and technology, and unanticipated costs incurred during the school year. Only 20% of the funds that are received by school districts, if they are supplemented, not supplanted, must be allocated towards learning loss during the pandemic.
So the question is, well, out of that over $12 billion that we think might be coming into school districts, how much would Montgomery potentially be seeing? And I want to emphasize again, over $12 billion, and our estimates are that we would see 4.3 million. I don't want to sound ungrateful, and I don't want to make it sound like 4.3 million is not a significant amount of money, but when there's over 12 billion being distributed to over 1,000 school districts in Texas, you can start doing the math. And again, because the formulas are weighted around high impact of socioeconomic, federal enrollment statutes around high poverty, the higher your percentage and ratio of poverty is in a district, the more funds that you would be allocated. And so if you look at the comparison districts, these are actual districts. We did take out the names because right now these are just suggested. There's lots of groups doing the suggested number of dollars that would be coming, so till we know things are facts. But what we looked for were districts about our size that had either similar rates of poverty or higher, and then you could see the discrepancy in dollars. And I draw to your attention the one, as you say to me, well, how does this make sense, Dr. Morrison? I am trying to think about what a good answer for that is, but District B, which is almost exactly our size, just 100 more students right now than we have. We are at 27% economically disadvantaged. This district, and this is a real district in Texas, is at 38.4. And when you compare the 4.3 million we would get during the duration of Esser 3 versus the 9.2 that this district would get, there just seems to be something about that calculation that doesn't feel correct. Again, I can just speak for myself. I've always believed that for kids who come to school with less, they should get more at school. I fundamentally don't think it's not an appropriate mindset to make some of this funding be allocated for disproportionate impact of COVID. And we know communities impacted by poverty have impacted with more challenges than others. But in thinking about why these dollars were first allocated, if it was to get schools open, we've been open almost the entire year. If it's to not only have schools open, but get the majority of kids back for in-person learning, we've been in person at 90% and growing every month, and we stand at almost 95%. We have done that which exactly the federal government and the state wants us to do, and yet somehow the funding formulas are not working their way in the way we would hope if they are allocated to our district. Again, the issue is that these are funds that were allocated for a pandemic that impacted every school district, all students, all K-12 education, and yet the formulas are almost entirely focused around high levels of economically disadvantaged students. And so if you had to take the money and use it for those students in those schools, I would understand that. And so we would have to use that $4.3 million, and I would have to present to this board how we would be using it at Lincoln, Montgomery Elementary School, and Stewart Creek. But the rules are you get the money based on high levels of socioeconomic students, but you can use it across your school district for salaries, for positions, for programs, for technology, and so it can be spread throughout your district. And so these are just some things that we're trying to get a better sense of. We wanted to update you tonight. We are reaching out to our local delegation. We are reaching out to TEA for further guidance. But we did feel because there's so much that people are hearing the news of billions of dollars coming to school districts in Texas, we wanted to update you with what we know, what we are doing to get more information, and then certainly take direction from this board for what you'd like to see happen next.
So what's the total budget of HISD?
$2 billion, Justin, I believe.
How much has HISD gotten out of this, or will get?
Well, again, to this point, you're just looking at different groups that are kind of doing the modeling, but we have some of the modeling for Esser 3 could be in excess of $700 million.
So almost $1 billion. So that's 50% of their budget. So using my iPhone here, we get basically 4%. So I'm not quite sure how that makes sense to me.
Well, and again, I think as Mr. Moreno said, when you think about, when you put this all together, and these aren't, I don't believe these were intended to impact this way, but you take our district versus some of the other districts that did not open right away. You take our district versus some of the other districts where we've had our students in person the entire year, and they are below 50%. We have incurred costs because we budgeted for students being in school, they've been in school. If your students have been in person or remotely, you maybe aren't running as many buses, you're not having to have as many lights on, the energy efficiencies are going to go up. So if you've had fewer kids for in-person instruction, you've probably added to your fund balance. Then on top of it, and again, I completely support where our state legislature is going with hold harmless, but that is not something that benefits Montgomery ISD. We not only have found the students that were lost at the beginning of the year, we were very diligent about that. We've grown since the beginning of the year. Matter of fact, from last week to this week, we grew about 18 students, and we continue to grow. So all these things that are being done to limit the negative impacts of COVID are not benefiting Montgomery ISD proportionately, and that's just something we've got to figure out.
I tend to agree, and I think it's time that our representatives start listening. We've had conversations with them, and I've talked to them. But when we see numbers like this, where you've got District C with 8,000 students and they get double the money, and I'm all for, just like anybody else. I mean, I do firmly believe that high poverty areas need more allocation of funds. They certainly do. But when I hear when a district like HISD is getting 50% of their budget given to them, it's so disproportionate in terms of our federal tax dollars and how they flow down to the state and how the state divvies up the money. We talk a lot about recapture. We still can't figure out, and I'd like to know from our legislators, where is the money going? And why can't we get that money allocated back to us? We fight constantly for funds, and when I hear of other districts building elaborate things and this kind of money, it's very difficult for me to understand how a district like HISD it's basically a windfall of 50% of their budget's given to them. So basically they're getting another 50% on top of their current budget.
That has dedicated uses. There are some provisions, but
Sure.
There's a lot of latitude. And again, I think the part where I'm trying to understand it, I have led districts that have been high socioeconomic. I understand the need, but usually when you get federal dollars, they're very prescriptive. You must use them for the very students that you're getting allocated the dollars. The challenge here is that you're getting dollars for high numbers of students who are impacted based on their socioeconomic status,
Sure.
but you can spread it across all of your schools, poverty and non-poverty. You can put positions in schools, poverty and non-poverty. So you get it for a reason, but you don't have to use it for that reason. And I think that's the part where we're just trying to get more information. And so we wanted to bring it to your attention. Again, we will continue to get more information. We'll continue to bring this to your attention, but we certainly also want to take direction in terms of what you would like to see happen next.
I understand this is a projection on their part of what they're planning on doing. What's the time frame?
I think over the next several weeks, the legislature is trying to figure out what are the guidance from the Federal Department of Education in terms of uses for budgeting allocations, and then for especially Esser 2 and 3, then the next steps will be how much of those funds are allocated directly to school districts and how much of them are staying at some level for the foundational program or used by TEA.
Are there other districts that are in the same boat as us?
We are looking at districts across the state of Texas that are about our size, have a similar amount of socioeconomic ratio, and trying to figure out, just based on the modeling, where they are landing in terms of federal dollars, and to see if there is a coalition of districts such as ours that want to at least bring this to the attention of lawmakers and policymakers as they make their final decisions as to what they think is the right thing to do, that they have as much information as possible. And again, I want to say this, not trying to protect anybody, not trying to be, politically correct, but I think people are trying to do the right things with these dollars. The hold harmless provision by our lawmakers, that's important in a year like we've had. But for districts like Montgomery, when you've had your students in school, when you're not building your fund balance because your students are not being taught remotely, when you have not only not lost students, but you've gained students, then this is just another potential impact that will be challenging based off of what school districts can use the money for.
And we have to act fast, right?
With everything, we have to act smartly, but with some expediency.
Yes.
And I think you're right, Dr. Morrison. It's, I think the question isn't, I think people are trying to do the right thing here. It's really how it's being allocated and then what it can be used for. But there seems to be a huge disparity between how much we're being allocated compared to other districts. It seems to be a very wide gap. So that's something
I just draw attention, Mr. Hopkins, to District C, and this is the part where if I say, well, hypothetically, if they're 10% higher in socioeconomic than we are, then they perhaps ought to get 10% more revenue than we.
Sure.
The math just doesn't work out, and that's the part where we need to get additional guidance, and I'm sure that there will be an explanation, and we owe it to this board, this community, and our employees, based off of things that we will be able to do or not do with whatever money we ultimately get, and versus what other districts will be able to do. But those are the things that we're trying to get more information about.
So it seems like there's really no need from any of the school districts for additional money this year. We're talking about people who had fund balance, they don't have kids in school. So is there any strings attached to this money?
There are provisions that you have to use 20% of the money, whatever you're allocated, for additional learning opportunities. So we've spoken about the COVID slide. Usually students impacted by poverty lose half of what they learned over the summer months, and we know that with COVID, and there's anywhere from a 4 to a 6 month learning gap that students in Texas are experiencing. So you have to use at least 20% of that for extended learning programs, before school, after school, summer programs. I think I actually don't know yet, Mr. Hammonds, if there are provisions around salary. I think what I would think is most school districts probably wouldn't use it to increase salary, because these are one-time dollars, and as we've talked many times, and this board has directed your staff, we do not use one-time dollars for salary increases, but you can add positions, you can add retention bonuses, you can put high-level hiring bonuses in. So there are a lot of things that you can do around salary that are not reoccurring costs.
Which makes us hard to stay competitive.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Indeed.
Any other questions? Dr. Morrison, if you'll keep us in the loop on it, we'd be glad to help any way we can.
Will do.
Texas Education Code 11.159 requires school board members to complete a number of trainings, and it requires the lovely board president to read those trainings as board members complete them once a year. We have to read out as a matter of the minutes if a board member has completed the required continuing education, exceeded, or is deficient. Mr. Dennison has exceeded. Mr. Fuller has exceeded. Mr. Hammonds has exceeded. Ms. Porton has exceeded. Ms. Turner has exceeded. Mr. Kirby has exceeded. Mr. Hopkins is a new board member and has until October to complete his training. Are there any questions? All right. Then I think the only other item on our agenda for the evening is the monthly financial reports. Mr. Lynn?
No additional information other than what's in your packet.
Okay, board members, are there any questions? All right, with that, I believe we are done with we don't need a closed session. We've completed that. And for that reason, ladies and gentlemen, I will call this meeting to be adjourned.